Have you ever been told you don't belong simply because of who you are? Imagine being a 14-year-old girl, holding a first-class ticket in your hand, excited for a flight with your mom, only to be forced out of your seat by strangers who believed you didn't deserve to be there. No mistake, no misunderstanding, just prejudice, plain and sharp. Now imagine the choice before you stay silent and disappear into the shadows, or stand tall in the spotlight you never asked for. What would you do if the entire cabin stared at you, waiting to see whether you would fight for your right to exist in that space? This is not just a story about one flight. It is about dignity. It is about courage. And it is about the moment when a child's tears transformed into a movement that shook an entire industry. So ask yourself, if it were you in that seat, how would you want the world to respond? Stay with us, because this story will challenge your heart, stir your memory, and maybe even change the way you see respect itself. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the journey begins now. The cabin lights in Atlas Airlines. Flight 472 glowed with that faint golden tint that makes first class feel like a private lounge in the sky. Leather seats stretched out like recliners, passengers settled in with tablets, champagne glasses, and the calm expectation of a smooth cross-country flight. It was 7:45 a.m. at JFK Airport, and the last few travelers were stowing their carry-ons. At seat 2A sat a young girl, maybe 14 at most, dressed in a neat navy blue school blazer with gold buttons. Her braids were tied back with a ribbon. She had placed a slim leather backpack under the seat in front of her, the initials AJ embossed on the flap. The girl sat quietly, her small hands folded on her lap, eyes darting between the safety card and the world beyond the oval window. Her name was Amara Johnson, and this was the first time she had ever flown without her mother. She breathed slowly, steadying herself. Her mother's words echoed in her head. Keep calm, even if people stare. You belong here as much as anyone else. Those words had been repeated every time Amara walked into new spaces, elite schools, debate tournaments, science camps, places where her dark skin sometimes drew more attention than her talent. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. A flight attendant offered a warm towel. Amara thanked her softly. She checked her phone, one last message from her mother. Dr. Naomi Johnson, a CEO who rarely had time for long texts. Proud of you. Amara, text me when you land. Remember, you've earned your seat. Amara smiled faintly, tucking the phone away. She didn't expect trouble, but trouble came fast. From the front galley, a tall woman in a pressed uniform marched down the aisle. Her silver name tag caught the light Linda Parker, purser. Her jaw was set tight, her heels clacking against the floor like small gavel strikes. She stopped right in front of Amara. Her voice sliced through the calm murmur of the cabin. Stand up, right now. This seat isn't yours. Every head in first class turned. The clink of glassware stopped. Amara blinked, confused. Excuse me. Linda's eyes narrowed. Don't play games. Young lady, first class isn't for children. Take your things and move to the back. Amara's chest tightened. She reached quickly into the side pocket of her blazer, pulling out her boarding pass. This is seat 2A. It says right here. Linda didn't glance at the pass. She waved it off, as though swatting a fly. Minors aren't permitted in first class on this route. We have policies. Now gather your bag. The words echoed, heavy and humiliating. Passengers whispered. One man in a suit shook his head. A woman across the aisle lowered her tablet, staring. Amara's fingers trembled as she held the boarding pass out again. But my mom booked this. She confirmed it yesterday. she said. Linda cut her off sharply. I don't care what your mom said. Rules are rules. The air pressed in on Amara. She remembered the stories her mother told about bias being asked for extra ID at hotel check-ins, being mistaken for staff at her own conferences. She had thought maybe, just maybe, being young would shield her. But here it was, right at 30,000 feet before the plane even left the ground. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed hard. She wanted to cry, yet something inside her whispered, "Not here, not now." From 2 rows back, a passenger shifted forward. Elena Morales, a Latina freelance journalist with a notebook balanced on her knee, tilted her head. She scribbled something down, her brows furrowed. She had seen confrontations like this before. Across the aisle, an older man in a gray sport coat sat rigid. Richard Coleman, retired business executive, tapped his fingers against the armrest. Conflicted. He looked at the scene, at the girl's trembling hands, and then back at his newspaper. He adjusted his glasses, saying nothing. The silence was suffocating. Linda folded her arms. You can make this easy or hard. Do you want me to call security? Amara felt her face flush hot. Her mother had told her, they may challenge you, they may doubt you, but you have the right to stand your ground. Her voice, though shaking, came out steady. Ma'am, this is my seat. My ticket says 2A. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. She tapped her earpiece, murmured something, and within a minute, another uniformed figure appeared. David Miller, the first officer. He glanced at Amara, then at Linda. What's the issue? Linda gestured at Amara like pointing at contraband. Unauthorized minor in first class. Refuses to move. David barely looked at the boarding pass. He sighed. Escort her to economy. We'll deal with it later. The decision was swift, like a stamp sealing a fate. Amara's heart sank. She felt the eyes of every passenger drilling into her. Slowly, she bent down to pull her backpack from under the seat. Her fingers brushed against the leather cover of her journal. She hesitated, then pulled it out too. If she was going to be dragged away, at least she'd carry her own words with her. As she stood, Linda's hand hovered near her shoulder, ready to push her along. Amara flinched. She bit her lip hard, holding back tears. The walk down the aisle was endless. Past the wide seats, the champagne glasses, the murmurs of strangers. Past the curtain divider that seemed to drop like a wall between dignity and dismissal. She clutched her journal tighter, whispering to herself, I didn't do anything wrong. Row after row blurred until she reached the cramped back. Seat 28F, middle seat. By the restroom, a flight attendant pointed, Here, sit. Amara lowered herself, backpack on her knees. The smell of disinfectant stung her nose. Children cried somewhere nearby. She opened her phone under the dim light, typed a quick message with shaking thumbs. They pulled me out. Again. She hit send. Her mother would see it. Doctor. Naomi Johnson always saw everything. But right now, Amara sat alone. Her journal closed on her lap, the hum of engines beginning to rise. And in her chest, a question burned hotter than fear. Why is my skin always questioned before my seat? The plane hadn't even left the ground, and the story had already begun. The hum of the engines grew louder, but inside seat 28F, Amara sat stiff, her journal pressed against her lap. Around her, passengers settled into cramped rows, tugging at seat belts, sliding bags under seats. The air was dense with the smell of coffee and reheated breakfast sandwiches. No one spoke to her. She felt invisible, except for the sting of whispers that still seemed to echo from first class. But before this morning unraveled, before the purser's voice turned sharp as a blade, Amara's life had been filled with the ordinary moments of a teenager who loved to read, write, and dream. She was 14, but she carried herself with the poise of someone older. Teachers always noticed it. Friends sometimes teased her for it. She was the one who asked hard questions in class, who stayed behind after debate club to challenge the coach about fairness in the judging rubric. Amara lived in a brownstone in Harlem with her mother, Dr. Naomi Johnson, and her father, Dr. Christopher Johnson, a well-respected internist at Mount Sinai. Their home was full of books stacked on every shelf, framed photographs of black leaders and scientists, and small notes Naomi left taped to mirrors and doors. Notes like, "Hold your head high and don't shrink yourself for anyone." Naomi was not just a mother. She was one of the most visible black female CEOs in the country, the head of Johnson Aeronautics and Systems, a tech company specializing in aerospace design and safety systems. Under her leadership, the company had grown into a $3.5 billion giant, with contracts that touched nearly every major airline, including Atlas Airlines, the very carrier that now mistreated her daughter. Naomi's rise had not been gentle. She had faced boardrooms where her expertise was dismissed until a white male colleague repeated her exact words. She had been told she was too direct, too emotional, too ambitious. Through it all, she had carved her space. Her victories were earned, not gifted, and because of that, she poured everything she learned into her daughter. Amara remembered the night before this flight. Her mother had sat with her at the kitchen table, sipping herbal tea, while Amara nervously checked her boarding pass again and again. "You'll be fine," Naomi had said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You have the right to be there. You belong in every room your hard work takes you into." But what if someone Amara had begun? "Then you stand tall," Naomi interrupted gently. "And if you can't, then you write. You let your words carry what you can't say out loud." That was why Amara always carried her journal, pages filled with her thoughts, sketches, sometimes poetry that rhymed awkwardly but carried truth. It was her anchor when she felt the storm of the world pressing too close. Now, in row 28 she opened it. The pen hovered. Her hand shook, but she wrote anyway. "Why do they always think I don't belong?" Her throat tightened. She closed the book quickly, afraid someone might peer over her shoulder. She remembered another moment not long ago when her mother had walked her into a boutique in Midtown. Amara had wanted a dress for her school's spring gala. The sales clerk had smiled brightly at the white women browsing nearby, but turned cold when Naomi and Amara entered. They were told the section they asked about was out of stock. Moments later, Amara saw another customer being shown that very rack of dresses. She had tugged her mother's sleeve in protest, but Naomi had only whispered, "Not every battle is fought here, but every insult is recorded." It was in these moments Amara learned to sense the shift in tone, the unspoken suggestion that she didn't belong. That same tone had laced Linda Parker's words in First Class. Back at the front of the plane, Linda poured champagne into crystal flutes, laughing with passengers who hadn't seen the whole ordeal, or who pretended not to care. She told herself she was only following policy. That was the shield she leaned on, policy. But deep down, she knew she had made a choice. She had judged Amara on sight. Near her, Elena Morales, the freelance journalist, kept scribbling in her notebook. Elena had covered city council meetings, protests, and stories of quiet injustice. Something about the scene with Amara gnawed at her. She wasn't sure yet if she would publish it, but she knew moments like these revealed who people truly were. She had written down the purser's exact words. She had also written down the look in Amara's eyes, defiance trembling under fear. And then there was Richard Coleman, still in his wide leather seat, newspaper folded in his lap. He had built a career in finance, retired comfortably, raised children who never knew what it was like to be told you don't belong here. Watching Amara be escorted down the aisle had stirred something in him. Shame, perhaps. The memory of times when he had chosen silence because it was easier. Times when colleagues made comments about women, about minorities, about outsiders, and he had laughed nervously, pretending he didn't hear. He told himself he was older now, powerless to change things. But the truth pressed heavy on his chest. He could have spoken up for Amara and didn't. While the plane taxied, Amara stared out the small window at the runway lights. She whispered to herself, too soft for anyone else to hear, "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't." She imagined her mother in some sleek conference room, voice commanding, hand steady on the table, executives leaning in to listen. If Naomi had been here, none of this would have happened. But Naomi wasn't here. Not yet. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a reply. 3 words from her mother. "I'm coming now." Amara blinked, staring at the screen. She didn't understand. The plane was moving. The doors were closed. How could her mother possibly come? But Naomi Johnson had built her career defying the word impossible. And somewhere, in a tower in Manhattan, Naomi was already rising from her chair, startling an entire boardroom as she walked out. Phone pressed to her ear. "Atlas Airlines humiliated my daughter," she said flatly to the executives around her. "And you're going to watch how I deal with it." The story was only beginning to unfold. The plane had begun its slow crawl toward the runway, but the turbulence inside Amara's chest felt heavier than any bump of the tarmac. She sat wedged between 2 strangers in row 28, clutching her backpack so tightly her knuckles whitened. The hum of conversations around her blurred into a dull roar. She wanted to vanish. But memory has a way of keeping us company when silence is unbearable. As she pressed her forehead against the window, the moment replayed over and over the purser's command, the first officer's dismissal, the walk of shame past rows of staring faces. Her ears still burned. She had done everything right, and still she was treated like an intruder. Back in first class, Linda Parker smoothed her uniform jacket with a smug flick of her hand. To her, the matter was settled. A child didn't belong in first class. Not a child like Amara. She told herself it was professionalism, adherence to guidelines. But beneath that veneer of order was a bias she could never admit aloud. She bent down to pour a splash of champagne for a middle-aged couple in matching business suits. "We had a seating confusion earlier," she explained. Voice sugar sweet now. "All resolved." The couple smiled politely, uninterested. For them, the disturbance was a blip, nothing more. But for Amara, the ripples would last long beyond this flight. 2 rows away sat Elena Morales, pen scratching furiously across the page of her notebook. She had written down every word, "Stand up. This seat isn't yours." She had marked the way Amara's voice cracked, and the indifference of the crew. She didn't know yet if she would publish, but her journalist's instinct told her this was no ordinary misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And then there was Richard Coleman. He kept shifting in his wide leather seat, folding his newspaper, unfolding it, adjusting his glasses, sighing. The older man had made millions in finance, lectured at universities, and chaired charity boards. He had spoken often about ethics, but when it came time to defend a girl in plain sight, his lips had stayed closed. He replayed that moment in his head, the way Amara's small hand trembled as she offered her boarding pass, the way Linda swatted it away without looking. He had wanted to say something. His throat had even opened, but fear of confrontation clamped it shut. Now shame gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Amara opened her journal again. She didn't want to, but her hand moved on its own. She wrote in shaky letters, "I showed them my ticket. I did, but they looked right past it. They looked past me." She underlined the last sentence 3 times before snapping the book shut. The plane jolted slightly as it turned toward the runway. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been cleared for departure. Flight time to Los Angeles will be approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. Amara barely heard him. She thought of her mother again. Dr. Naomi Johnson was likely still in that gleaming Manhattan conference room, surrounded by executives in tailored suits. She pictured her mother's brow furrowed as she scrolled through her phone, reading the message. "They pulled me out. Again." Amara could almost hear the intake of breath Naomi would have taken. Short, controlled, the way she always did before shifting from mother to CEO. And in that conference room, the shift had already happened. Naomi rose from her chair so abruptly that several board members flinched. Her phone still glowed in her hand. "What's wrong?" one executive asked. "My daughter," Naomi said. Her voice clipped. "Your airline humiliated her." Gas rippled. The Atlas Airlines CEO, seated at the end of the long mahogany table, frowned. "Naomi, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." "There is no reasonable explanation." Naomi shot back. "She was in the seat I paid for, a seat confirmed by your system, and she was dragged out because someone decided she didn't belong there." The room fell silent. Naomi's words carried the weight of contracts, billions in investment, years of partnership. She looked around at the polished faces. "I built half the safety systems on the aircraft you fly," she said coldly. "Don't lecture me about what's reasonable. Back on the plane." Amara's phone buzzed again. She looked down. The message was short. Just 3 words, "I'm coming now." Her chest tightened. She didn't know how, but she believed it. If there was one thing she knew about her mother, it was that Naomi never made idle promises. In first class, Linda Parker continued her rounds, oblivious to the storm she had just set in motion. She laughed with passengers, straightened linens, and reassured herself that she had maintained order. Yet somewhere in her chest, a flicker of unease stirred. Helena closed her notebook and glanced around. She caught Richard Coleman's eye. For a moment, their gazes locked hers sharp with conviction, his clouded with guilt. She almost asked him why he hadn't spoken up, but she let the silence hang, heavy and accusing. "Down in seat 28F, Amara whispered to herself again. "I didn't do anything wrong." Her words were almost a prayer now, quiet enough to vanish beneath the roar of engines. But above that roar, another sound was building. A sound Amara could not yet hear, the determined footsteps of her mother leaving the boardroom. Phone pressed to her ear, voice crisp with authority as she summoned a car to JFK. The story was no longer just about a girl and a seat. It was about what happens when silence collides with power, and when dignity refuses to stay buried. The wheels of Flight 472 left the ground with a shudder, pressing passengers back into their seats as the plane climbed toward the clouds. The Manhattan skyline shrank below, but inside row 28F, Amara Johnson felt smaller than the city disappearing beneath her. She sat rigid, backpack wedged between her knees, staring at the seat in front of her. A sticker peeled from the tray table, revealing words scrawled in pen. Stay strong. She almost laughed at the irony. The purser's voice carried down the aisle, crisp and self-satisfied. Linda Parker had taken the intercom to announce service. Her tone was cheery, but to Amara it sounded like mockery. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll begin our breakfast service shortly. Her stomach tightened. In first class, they would be serving omelets with fresh herbs, croissants still warm. Here in economy, the smell of reheated eggs drifted from carts rattling down the narrow aisle. A crying baby wailed 2 rows back. The middle-aged man on her left already snored with his mouth open, his shoulder pressing into her space. She wanted to vanish, but the sting of injustice burned hotter than discomfort. She could still see Linda's face, the dismissive flick of her hand, the way David Miller had backed her without even scanning the boarding pass. The memory throbbed like an open bruise. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, shielding the screen from curious eyes. It was her mother. Stay calm. Don't argue. I'll be there. How could she be here? Amar gripped the phone tighter. The doors were closed. The plane was airborne. The words didn't make sense, yet they filled her with an odd warmth. If anyone could bend what seemed impossible, it was Dr. Naomi Johnson. Naomi was no stranger to turbulence, both literal and figurative. Back in Manhattan, she strode through the glass atrium of Atlas Airline's headquarters, heels striking the polished floor. Executives scrambled to keep up, whispering to one another. She had left a board meeting in chaos, announcing in front of everyone that her daughter had been humiliated on one of their planes. Her authority was unmistakable. She had built her career demanding accountability when others looked away. Get me everything. Naomi ordered her assistant over the phone. Flight manifest, crew roster, live cabin feed. Now? Her assistant hesitated. Live feed. That's restricted. Not to me. Naomi snapped. My company designed the system. Pull it up. Within minutes. Naomi stood in a private operations suite. Walls lined with monitors. Grainy images flickered passengers settling in, attendants moving through aisles. And then she saw her daughter Amar in row 28 hunched small, clutching her journal like a shield. Naomi's jaw tightened. Her thoughts split into 2 currents. One was the mother, heartbreaking at the sight of her child's shame. The other was the CEO, mind already calculating the systemic failures that allowed this. Bias disguised as policy. Silence disguised as professionalism. This was not new, but now it was personal. Back on the plane. Amara pressed her forehead against the cool window, eyes wet but refusing to let tears fall. She whispered into the glass, "Why me again?" She remembered last year, being followed around a store until her mother confronted the manager. She remembered the security guard at a mall who demanded her receipt when no one else was stopped. Each incident carved into her like scratches that never fully healed. This one cut the deepest because it happened in the very seat her mother had worked so hard to secure, not just financially, but symbolically. First class was more than a wider chair. It was proof that her family belonged in spaces where they had often been told they did not. In first class, Linda Parker leaned against the galley counter, sipping mineral water. David Miller joined her, his voice low. You sure about moving that kid could stir trouble? Linda rolled her eyes. It's procedure. You saw her. Didn't belong. Better to avoid issues up front. David frowned, but didn't press further. Complicity was easier than confrontation. He knew it, and deep down, he hated himself for it. But his career had been built on avoiding friction. Elena Morales, 3 rows behind. watched them with narrowed eyes. Her pen danced across her notebook. She had covered countless hearings and protests, but rarely had injustice unfolded this clearly in front of her. She knew a story when she saw one. Her journalist's instinct told her this was more than a seating dispute. It was a snapshot of something larger, something systemic. Richard Coleman still hadn't moved. He read the same page of his newspaper for 15 minutes, eyes glazed. Every line he tried to read blurred with guilt. He had been raised to believe silence was safe. Yet looking at Amara's hunched figure as she passed earlier had shaken him. For the first time in years, he wondered if safety built on silence was just cowardice by another name. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers shifted, pulling laptops from bags, flipping through magazines. But for Amara, time slowed. She opened her journal again, pen hovering. Her handwriting came out jagged. They say rules. They mean me. They mean my skin. Always me. She slammed the journal shut. Up front, Linda prepared to roll out breakfast trays. She smiled at the passengers, but unease gnawed faintly at her. Something about the girl's eyes haunted her steady, even as they glistened with unshed tears. She brushed the thought aside. Order had been restored, or so she believed, because at that very moment, in the operations suite of Atlas Airlines headquarters, Naomi Johnson was striding toward the exit doors with 2 board members at her side. "We're going to JFK," she said, "and we're going now." Her daughter's humiliation would not remain unseen. Not this time. The city blurred past in streaks of yellow and gray as Naomi's black sedan surged down the Van Wyck Expressway. She sat in the back seat, spine straight, fists clenched on her knees. The hum of traffic and the occasional blare of a horn filtered through the windows. But her mind was fixed only on the image of Amar pressed into that cramped row. Dignity stripped away by the very airline Naomi's company helped sustain. Her phone buzzed again. It was the Atlas Airlines CEO, Martin Keene, voice frantic. "Naomi, I just heard your daughter. On our plane." Naomi's tone was ice. "Your crew humiliated her in front of everyone. I saw it on your own cameras." "Please," Martin stammered. "We'll handle it after landing." "No." Naomi cut him off. "This will be handled before that plane leaves the gate in Los Angeles. If it isn't, you'll lose more than a contract. You'll lose the trust of every parent who buys a ticket." Silence crackled. Then Martin whispered, "We'll have people waiting." Naomi ended the call, staring out the window. Her thoughts tangled. The mother in her wanted to weep, to rush into the cabin and cradle her daughter. But the CEO in her sharpened that grief into strategy. She remembered the nights at MIT when professors dismissed her brilliance, the Silicon Valley boardrooms where she was spoken over until numbers forced silence. Every slight had forged armor. Today, that armor would shield her daughter. Meanwhile, aboard Flight 472, Amara forced herself to breathe evenly. She had opened her journal again, sketching tiny stars in the corner of the page, pretending each one was a piece of her courage. But the voices around her pierced through the sighs of passengers annoyed by delays, the whispers blaming her for disruption. She bit her lip. "It's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong." Elena Morales leaned forward in her seat, whispering across the aisle to a fellow passenger. "You saw it, didn't you? She had her boarding pass. She belongs in 2B. The man nodded hesitantly, but said nothing aloud. Fear of confrontation clamped his throat. Elena scribbled faster. She could already see the headline, "Black Teen Forced from First-Class Seat by Airline Crew." In the cockpit, David Miller adjusted his headset, sweat prickling his temple. He had replayed Linda's decision in his head a dozen times. He should have checked the pass. He should have intervened. But instead, he had defaulted to habit trust the senior attendant. Avoid conflict. Keep the schedule. It was safe. But was it right? His gut churned. Linda, in the galley, stacked trays, jaw tight. She told herself she had followed procedure. Children in economy, adults in first class, that was the way things worked. But the words she had said, "Sweetheart, you don't belong here," echoed, sour and sharp. She hated how they sounded, even in memory. Still, she pushed the doubt aside. Authority was her shield. At that same moment, Richard Coleman closed his newspaper, hands trembling. He remembered the bus rides of his youth when he'd seen classmates shoved aside and said nothing. Now, decades later, he was silent again. Shame pressed down heavier than the plane itself. He resolved, with a quiver in his chest, that silence would not be his legacy this time. The captain's voice came overhead, calm but taut. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 34,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." But relaxation was far from Amara's reach. She clutched her phone again, whispering into the mic, "Mom, I can't take it." Everyone's staring. Naomi's voice came firm through the tiny speaker. "Amara, listen to me. You are stronger than they want you to believe. Keep your chin high. I'm almost there." How Amara whispered, half in disbelief, half in hope. "You'll see." Naomi's car veered into the JFK arrivals lane. Security personnel recognized her badge immediately and waved the sedan through. She strode from the car like a storm in motion, flanked by 2 Atlas board members rushing to keep up. Inside the terminal, cameras already hovered. Someone had leaked the story, and reporters smelled history. Naomi didn't flinch. She wanted witnesses. In the cabin, the tension only thickened. A passenger in row 12 muttered to his wife, "All this for one kid. Can't they just fly?" His wife shot him a look, whispering, "It's not about flying. It's about respect." Amara heard that, and for the first time since she'd been forced back, she let herself breathe easier. Someone gets it. Elena's pen scratched harder. She wasn't just documenting. Now she was channeling anger, the kind that could ignite a movement. She glanced toward Amara, catching the girl's eyes for a moment. Her nod was small but steady. "I see you. I will tell your story." Back in the operations suite, Martin Keene called again, panic rising. "Naomi, the press already knows. It's going viral." Naomi's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good. Let the world see. Change only comes when silence breaks." She pulled open the door to the jet bridge, security at her side. Her heels struck metal, echoing like thunder. She was minutes away from facing the crew who had humiliated her child. The mother's heart within her whispered, "Hold on. Amara, I'm coming." The CEO's resolve thundered louder. "This ends today." The hum of the engines was steady, but the cabin air had grown dense, thick with whispers and the weight of what had just happened. Amara sat in row 28F, her journal open but untouched, her pen trembling in her hand. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the seat and become invisible. But the echo of her mother's voice on the phone clung to her like armor. "Keep your chin high. I'm almost there." Passengers shifted uneasily. A woman leaned across the aisle, her voice soft but firm. "Sweetheart, you did nothing wrong." Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe that, yet the eyes on her made it hard to hold on. Up front, Linda Parker smoothed her uniform, her face set in a mask of professionalism. Yet her hands betrayed her tapping the counter, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. She told herself she had acted properly, by the book, but deep down, a whisper gnawed. It wasn't policy. It was instinct. And instinct wasn't enough to humiliate a child. David Miller glanced at her, unease pooling in his gut. He wanted to speak, to admit he hadn't checked the ticket because he trusted her judgment. But what if saying so made him complicit? He told himself silence was safer. Still, the guilt pressed heavier with each passing mile. At that moment, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has informed us we'll remain at cruising altitude another 10 minutes before service resumes." The words were routine, yet passengers sensed tension behind them. In row 1C, Elena Morales lifted her phone discreetly. She had already written 3 paragraphs of her article draft, her journalist instinct ablaze, but something told her to start recording video now. Her gut whispered, "The story isn't over. The real moment is still coming." And she was right, because on the ground at JFK, Dr. Naomi Johnson had cleared security with a wave of her executive badge. She strode down the jet bridge, flanked by Atlas Airlines board members and 2 security officers. Her heels struck the floor like gavel blows, sharp and unyielding. Passengers waiting near the gate hushed as they caught sight of her, a tall black woman in a charcoal suit, her presence radiating authority and urgency. Inside the cabin, Linda looked up as the door swung open. Shock flashed across her face, quickly buried under a veneer of authority. "This area is restricted," she began, but her voice faltered when she recognized Naomi. Naomi didn't pause. She stepped into first class, her eyes cold, her voice steady. "Where is my daughter?" Gas rippled through the cabin. Heads turned. Amara lifted her head from row 28, her eyes widening. She clutched her journal to her chest, whispering, "Mom." Her relief washed through her like a tide. Linda straightened, her jaw tight. "Ma'am, we were following airline policy. Unaccompanied minors aren't permitted in first class." Naomi cut her off, her voice ringing with controlled fire. "Don't lie to me. Your own staff scanned her ticket. You ignored it. And you humiliated her in front of every passenger here." Passengers leaned in, the cabin electric with anticipation. Elena's phone captured every word. David Miller stepped from the cockpit, his expression tense. "Mrs. Johnson, we can resolve this after we land." "No," Naomi said, raising her voice just enough to silence him. "This will be resolved now, on the ground, before this plane moves another mile. Because this isn't about policy, it's about bias, and I will not let it pass." Her words cut through the cabin like a blade. Murmurs spread, some passengers nodding, others murmuring in agreement. Even Richard Coleman, trembling in 1A, raised his voice for the first time in years. "She's right. I saw it happen. That girl showed her ticket, and we all sat here in silence. Shame on us." The cabin erupted in a low rumble of agreement. Applause started in row 12, tentative at first, then spreading forward like a wave. Amara's cheeks burned as she rose from her seat, clutching her backpack, and made her way slowly up the aisle toward her mother. The applause swelled louder with each step until she reached Naomi's side. Naomi bent down, gathering Amara into her arms. Her voice softened but carried for all to hear, "You did nothing wrong." They did. The plane was silent, every eye fixed on the sight of a mother shielding her child not only with love, but with undeniable authority. Linda's composure cracked, her voice trembling. "You can't accuse us of racism. We were following procedure." Naomi's gaze cut through her. Your training doesn't tell you to ignore a ticket. Your training doesn't tell you to belittle a child. What you followed was your prejudice. And prejudice has no place on an airline. Elena whispered into her phone as she streamed live history is unfolding in this cabin right now. David Miller swallowed hard, his silence collapsing under the weight of evidence. He tried weakly. It was just a precaution. Naomi stepped closer, eyes blazing. A precaution rooted in prejudice is not precaution. It is discrimination, and I will not allow my daughter or any child to carry that burden. The captain appeared in the doorway, his calm demeanor strained. He looked from Naomi to the executives who had followed her into the cabin, then back to the passengers whose eyes bore into him. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "We'll need a replacement crew before departure." The words hit like thunder. Passengers gasped. Linda's face drained of color. "You can't be serious," she stammered. "Yes," Naomi said evenly, "because 20 years of service doesn't excuse 20 seconds of humiliation." The weight of truth hung in the cabin, undeniable, unshakable. The cabin lights hummed faintly as the air thickened with a silence more powerful than any announcement. Amara pressed into her mother's side, clutching Naomi's hand with the fierce grip of someone who had endured too much in too little time. The girl's eyes, once hollow with humiliation, now gleamed with relief, but also fear of what came next. Naomi stood tall, her presence filling the narrow aisle as if she had expanded beyond her own body. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice calm yet resonant, "what you have just witnessed was not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern, a sickness that eats away at our dignity when we accept silence as safety." Passengers leaned in. Some nodded. Others sat frozen. But all listened. Even the crying baby 2 rows back hushed as if the moment demanded reverence. Linda Parker's lips tightened. She opened her mouth, ready to defend herself, but Naomi raised a hand. "Don't speak. For once, you will listen." Gas rippled. To hear a passenger, any passenger, address a senior crew member with such authority was unprecedented. But this was not just any passenger. This was Dr. Naomi Johnson, CEO of Johnson Aeronautics, partner to the very airline she now held accountable. Naomi turned slightly, addressing the whole cabin. "Every one of you paid for safe passage, for dignity in the skies. My daughter did the same. But instead of respect, she was told she didn't belong. Not because of a policy, not because of a mistake, but because of the way she looks." The words landed heavy, undeniable. Richard Coleman found his voice again. "She's right. I sat here, doing nothing. I let a child carry the weight of my silence. No more." His voice cracked, but it carried strength. "We can't pretend we didn't see." Applause began, hesitant, then growing. A man in row 14 raised his hand, saying, "I filmed it too. I'll share it." Others echoed. Phones raised in solidarity. Elena Morales was already live streaming, her camera capturing faces, voices, the very birth of accountability in real time. Linda flushed crimson. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "Passengers shouldn't disrupt order." Order, Naomi's voice cut sharp. Order built on humiliation is not order. It is oppression wrapped in a smile. For a moment, Linda faltered. Her script of professionalism had no line for this. David Miller stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. His voice was low, but audible. "I should have checked the ticket. That's on me." His words were clumsy, but raw. A confession, not a defense. The captain returned from conferring with ground control, his jaw rigid. We've been instructed to deplane the crew. Replacements are on their way. The announcement struck like lightning. Passengers erupted some clapping, others murmuring disbelief. Never had they seen crew removed mid-flight operation. But history was unfolding at 34,000 feet. Amara looked up at her mother, whispering, "They're really leaving." "Yes," Naomi said softly, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair, "because no one who shames a child deserves to hold authority in the skies." For the first time that day, Amara smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. Naomi turned to Elena, recognizing her phone lifted high. "Make sure the world hears this. Not for me, not for Amara alone, but for every passenger who has ever been told they don't belong." Elena nodded, her eyes shining. "It already has 30,000 viewers." Naomi inhaled slowly, then spoke again. Her words measured like stone being laid into foundation. "From this day forward, I will launch what I call the Amara Protocol. It will be written into every airline contract I touch. Mandatory anti-bias training, independent cabin audits, anonymous reporting for passengers and crew, and clear consequences because silence will no longer protect the guilty." The name struck like a spark. The Amara Protocol. Passengers whispered it, testing the phrase on their tongues. It carried both intimacy and power, a mother's shield and a system's demand. Amara's eyes widened. "Mom, you're naming it after me?" "Yes," Naomi said, her voice softening, her steel bending into tenderness, "because your courage deserves to change the world." Emotion swept through the cabin. A woman dabbed tears from her eyes. A man placed a hand on his heart, Richard whispered. "Maybe this is what justice looks like, not just punishment, but change." The captain cleared his throat, almost reverent now. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while arrangements are finalized. We will continue shortly with a new crew. Thank you for your patience." But no one cared about delays anymore. They knew they were part of something larger than schedules and service. They were witnesses to the moment an injustice birthed reform. Linda sank into a jump seat, her authority stripped bare. For the first time in years, she had no words. David stood stiff beside her, shame etched into the lines of his face. They were still crew in uniform, but no longer in power. Naomi placed an arm firmly around Amara. For a fleeting second, her composure cracked, and she whispered only for her daughter, "I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but we will make sure it never happens again." And in that embrace, amidst the hum of an aircraft suspended between cities, hope took flight. The cabin buzzed with low conversation as word spread that the original crew would be replaced. For most passengers, this was unprecedented. They had flown through delays, cancellations, even emergency landings, but never had they seen crew escorted off while an aircraft waited, suspended in time. Amara nestled against her mother's side, exhaustion tugging at her, though adrenaline kept her wide-eyed. Her small hand clutched Naomi's suit sleeve as though letting go might dissolve the fragile safety she had reclaimed. Naomi pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. She looked calm to the world. But inside, waves of fury and sorrow still collided. At the back of the plane, Linda Parker sat stiff in her jump seat, her once commanding presence hollowed out. She stared straight ahead, unable to meet the eyes of passengers who now whispered openly. Words drifted through the air like fragments of a verdict. She humiliated her. It was bias, unforgivable. Each whisper tightened around her like a noose. David Miller stood near the cockpit door, arms folded, his posture rigid, but his face pale. The confession he had offered earlier had not absolved him. It only exposed the weight of his complicity. He had flown hundreds of safe hours, earned medals for precision. Yet in this moment, he felt like a coward. The tension broke when the cabin door swung open again. 2 replacement attendants stepped in, their uniforms crisp, their expressions grave. Behind them came a young flight supervisor, his voice steady as he addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. A new crew is here to ensure this flight continues safely. We appreciate your cooperation." Applause erupted, not for the inconvenience, but for the message change was happening in real time. Naomi watched the passengers clap, her hand still resting protectively on Amara's shoulder. She saw in their faces something rare solidarity. Elena Morales leaned forward in her seat, phone still recording. "We are live at 34,000 feet, she whispered, voice charged with awe. Atlas Airlines has just replaced its crew mid-flight after passengers and a CEO called out discrimination against a 14-year-old black girl. Over 100,000 viewers are tuned in right now. This is history in motion." Her chat feed exploded hearts, angry faces, and words scrolling faster than she could read. "This is outrageous. Justice at last. She's a hero." Amara noticed the glow of the live stream and tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, people are watching." "Yes," Naomi said gently. "The world is watching. And that's good, because what happened to you can't be hidden in shadows. It deserves the light." Amara's brow furrowed. "But what if people make fun of me? Or say it's my fault?" Naomi knelt slightly, so her eyes met her daughter's. "They might. Some people always try to twist the truth. But the truth stands taller than lies. You didn't cause this. You exposed it. And now, millions will know what courage looks like." The girl blinked back tears. "Courage, I just sat there." "Exactly," Naomi whispered. "You sat there with dignity when they tried to strip it away. That is courage." Passengers nearby listened. Some moved to tears themselves. A middle-aged woman reached across the aisle to squeeze Amara's hand. "You remind me of my granddaughter," she said softly. "Don't you ever forget you belong everywhere your ticket says you belong." Amara managed a tiny smile, the kind that warmed the cabin far more than the overhead lights. The replacement crew began service quietly, their professionalism careful, deliberate. They treated Amara and Naomi with the same courtesy given to every passenger. It was a stark contrast, a silent rebuke to what had come before. When a tray of drinks reached Amara, the attendant's voice was gentle. "What would you like, sweetheart?" For the first time that day, Amara answered without hesitation, "Apple juice, please." Naomi watched, her chest swelling. Something as simple as her daughter receiving juice without question felt like restoration. Small, fragile, but real. Meanwhile, Linda and David were escorted down the aisle, their exit heavy with shame. A few passengers filmed openly. Others turned their backs. No one clapped. Now it wasn't triumph, it was reckoning. The door closed behind them with a hiss, final and unforgiving. Richard Coleman, his newspaper folded and forgotten, leaned forward. His voice trembled but was firm. "I want to say to you, young lady, I'm sorry. I should have spoken sooner. Silence is comfortable, but it is also cruel." Amara looked at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you for saying that." Those words, simple and pure, broke something in Richard. For decades he had carried regret, but this child's forgiveness cracked it open into release. He dabbed at his eyes with the corner of his paper, whispering, "Maybe it's not too late to change." Helena captured the moment, narrating softly. What began as humiliation has transformed into something else. community, truth, even redemption. The plane surged smoothly through the sky, but inside it was no longer just a vessel between New York and Los Angeles. It had become a crucible, and as Amara leaned into her mother's side once more, Naomi whispered so only she could hear, "This is bigger than us now. We're not just passengers anymore. We are a movement." Amara closed her eyes, resting, a faint smile on her lips. For the first time since boarding, she felt safe. The cabin no longer felt like a sealed tube of silence in the sky. It pulsed with energy, every passenger aware they were not just on a flight, but inside a story spilling across the world. Screens glowed from seats, passengers refreshing feeds, reading comments, whispering updates. The ordinary rhythm of a flight snacks, naps, movies had been replaced by history unfolding live. Elena Morales sat with her phone angled perfectly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Viewers, we have now crossed 500,000 people tuned into this stream. They've just replaced the crew, and Dr. Naomi Johnson has announced the Amara Protocol, a reform initiative named for her daughter. What started as humiliation has now become a demand for accountability." The chat window raced faster than she could keep up. 500,000 watching justice for Amara boycott Atlas until change. "Tell that mom we stand with her." Amara peeked over at Elena's screen, her eyes widening. "Mom, are all those people watching me?" Naomi squeezed her hand. "Yes, baby, but they're not just watching you. They're standing with you. For a moment." Amara's chest tightened with fear. What if they laugh? What if they say I overreacted? The question swirled, but Naomi's hand on hers anchored her. She whispered back, "I don't feel brave." Naomi bent close, her words low and strong. "Bravery doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right, even when you are. And you, Amara, are brave." The girl exhaled, slowly nodding. Toward the front. Richard Coleman shifted uncomfortably, then raised his voice again. "Miss Johnson," he said, voice thick but firm. "I'm not on social media, but if you need someone to testify what happened here, I'll do it. I owe that much to this child." Applause echoed again, this time steadier, more unified. Passengers weren't just watching anymore. They were participants. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice came calm, but the strain was unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, Atlas Airline CEO Martin Keene has requested to speak directly with Dr. Johnson. Please remain seated." Every head turned as a flight attendant. One of the replacements walked swiftly down the aisle with a secure satellite phone. Naomi accepted it with the composure of someone who had spent her life in boardrooms, but her heart beat fiercely. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Naomi," Martin Keene's voice came, tight with urgency. "The live stream is everywhere. News outlets are calling. Investors are watching. I need you to know we're moving quickly to address this." Naomi's tone was cold steel. "Address it. You don't address humiliation after the fact. You prevent it before it happens. That's why I announced the Amara Protocol. And if Atlas doesn't commit, Johnson Aeronautics will sever ties today." Passengers gasped. Some clapped. Elena whispered to her live stream, "You heard it. She just threatened to pull a multi-billion-dollar contract live at 34,000 feet. Martin's voice wavered. "Naomi? Be reasonable. We'll need time." "No," Naomi cut in. "You've had time. How many complaints have already crossed your desk, ignored until they faded? This one will not fade. Either you stand with us now, or you stand exposed." For a long moment, silence filled the line. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Martin said, "We'll commit. Atlas will endorse the Amara Protocol. Consider it done." Naomi's lips pressed into a firm line. "Then announce it publicly. Tonight. Not buried in fine print." "I will," Martin promised. Naomi ended the call without pleasantries. She turned, lifting the phone slightly so the passengers could see. "Atlas has agreed to the Amara Protocol." The cabin erupted. Applause thundered. Passengers stood, clapping, cheering. Some filmed, others cried. Amara blinked in shock at the sudden roar of support. She looked up at her mother, whispering, "Mom, they're clapping for us." Naomi knelt again, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "No, sweetheart. They're clapping for what you represent, every person who's ever been told they don't belong." Elena narrated into her stream, her voice shaking with emotion. 500,000 viewers are now watching history unfold. Atlas Airlines has just agreed to systemic reform, mid-flight, because a mother refused silence and a child endured with dignity. Amara's cheeks flushed, a mixture of pride and disbelief. She whispered into her mother's shoulder, "I just wanted to sit in my seat." Naomi hugged her tight. "And that's exactly why this matters. Sitting in your seat should never be a battle." At the rear of the plane, whispers grew louder. Passengers already messaging friends, posting updates, sending clips. The story had slipped its boundaries. It was no longer a flight incident. It was becoming a movement. Outside the window, endless clouds stretched across the horizon, glowing in the afternoon light. To the passengers inside, it felt like more than sky. It felt like possibility. The roar of applause slowly faded, replaced by a hum of excited conversation that rippled across the cabin like waves. Some passengers leaned over aisles to shake hands. Others pulled out their phones to broadcast updates to loved ones. The plane still hurtled west at 34,000 feet, but in many ways it felt anchored to a moment larger than geography. Amara Johnson sat pressed against her mother's side, her fingers still laced tightly with Naomi's. She wanted to believe in the safety of that grip, but unease gnawed inside her. She whispered low enough only her mother could hear, "Mom, why are they all looking at me?" Naomi tilted her head, brushing her daughter's hair back. "Because you're the reason this happened. You gave them the courage to speak." Amara shook her head, eyes welling. "I didn't give anyone courage. I just sat there and cried. I wanted to disappear. Now it feels like everyone thinks I'm some hero." Naomi's voice softened, steady as always. "You don't have to feel like a hero to be one. Sometimes surviving with dignity is enough." Still, Amara felt torn. The weight of strangers' eyes pressed down on her, heavy with expectation. She opened her journal and scribbled furiously, "Why me? I never asked for this. Heroes aren't supposed to be scared. Heroes aren't supposed to wish it never happened." She slammed it shut before her mother could see. Up front, Elena Morales adjusted her phone as the viewership count blinked past 1 million. The chat scrolled faster than she could process. 1 million strong watching. "Naomi Johnson is a force. Justice for Amara. This changes everything." She spoke into her mic, her voice vibrating with conviction. "Viewers, this is no longer just a story about a girl in her seat. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. And more than 1 million of you are demanding change." Richard Coleman leaned over from 1A, his newspaper discarded. His voice trembled with both shame and resolve. "Ms. Johnson, I'm 72 years old. I've sat silent through too many things in my life. But tonight, when I see my grandchildren, I'll tell them I finally spoke up. That matters because of you." He nodded toward Amara. The girl's throat tightened. She managed a small, shaky smile, though inside her chest, the conflict churned. "Why do they keep thanking me? I didn't do anything except suffer." Naomi noticed, sensing her daughter's turmoil. She kissed the top of Amara's head. "It's all right to feel conflicted. Change is heavy, and sometimes it chooses us when we don't choose it. But you don't carry it alone. I'll carry it with you." The captain re-entered the cabin, his face composed, but his tone reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience. I've flown 20 years, and I've never witnessed a moment like this. We will land in Los Angeles in 3 hours, but I believe we've already reached a destination far greater." A hush spread. Then, in a rare breach of formality, he nodded toward Amara. "Young lady, you reminded us all of what justice looks like. And ma'am," he said to Naomi, "your courage made sure none of us forgot it." The applause returned, swelling louder than before. Phones recorded. Passengers stood, some with tears streaming down their cheeks. Amara buried her face in her mother's side, whispering through the noise, "I don't want to be famous. I just want to be me." Naomi's embrace tightened. "And you will be. But your story will live bigger than you. That's not punishment. It's a gift. One day you'll see it." Helena turned her camera back to herself, her voice breaking slightly. "We are over 1 million strong watching this cabin transform from humiliation to hope. History doesn't always happen in marble halls or courtrooms. Sometimes it happens in row 28 with a child who refused to disappear." The world beyond the cabin pressed closer. News networks had begun picking up Elena's stream. Hashtags exploded across social platforms. "Wa Justice for Amara." "The Amara Protocol." "She belongs." Television anchors interrupted broadcasts to report on the live unfolding of a story in the sky. And Amara, seated between her mother's strength and the eyes of a world she had never asked to see her, wrestled with the quiet storm inside. She was still just a girl who wanted to sip apple juice and read her book in peace. But now, she was also something else, a symbol. The descent into Los Angeles felt like it carried the weight of the entire world. The seatbelt sign flickered on, and a hush settled over the cabin. Not the ordinary quiet of landing, but the reverence of passengers who understood they had been part of something history would not forget. Amara Johnson pressed her forehead against the window. The city lights stretched endlessly below, a glowing net of possibilities. But her heart thudded with unease. She turned to her mother. "What happens when we land? Will there be cameras? People asking questions?" Naomi reached for her hand, her voice calm. "Yes, there will be questions, and there will be noise. But you don't have to answer any of it unless you want to. You owe no one but yourself the truth of your story." The plane jolted softly as the landing gear lowered. Around them, passengers adjusted their seats, but most eyes lingered on the mother and daughter at the center of everything. Some whispered blessings under their breath. Others recorded quiet video clips, as if capturing a sacred moment. Richard Coleman leaned forward from across the aisle. "Young lady," he said softly, "don't let the lights scare you. They're just reflections. What matters is that you're still yourself." His tone carried the gentleness of a grandfather making amends with the past. Amara nodded, but stayed silent. Inside, her thoughts spiraled. "I just wanted to sit in my seat. Why does that feel impossible? Why does fairness have to be so loud?" The tires screeched against the runway, the sudden impact jolting everyone upright. The plane slowed, taxied, and finally came to a stop at the gate. But before the doors opened, Captain Ellis stepped out of the cockpit. His voice, firm but heavy with respect, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience tonight. You have witnessed something rare, something that will outlast this flight. I want to make clear, as the captain of this aircraft, that what happened earlier was wrong, and I commend those who had the courage to speak, especially Ms. Johnson and her daughter." He paused, his throat tight. History may write this night differently than any of us imagined when we boarded, but I believe it will write it well. A wave of soft applause spread once more. The jet bridge connected, the chime rang, and the door opened. At first, there was silence. Then came the sound hundreds of voices echoing through the terminal, journalists shouting, cameras flashing like lightning. The aisle became a tunnel of lenses and microphones. Elena Morales, already broadcasting live, whispered into her phone, "We are here in Los Angeles, where crowds have gathered to see the girl and her mother who transformed a flight into a movement." Naomi stood first, her shoulders squared. She turned to her daughter. "Stay close to me. Hold your head high. You don't have to say a word. But if you choose to, speak your truth." Together, they stepped into the aisle. Passengers parted like an honor guard. Some reached out with gentle hands, brushing Amara's shoulder or Naomi's sleeve, murmuring words like "thank you," "bless you," "we're with you." The moment they crossed the threshold into the terminal, the sound hit them fully. Cheers, shouts, chants. "Justice for Amara," "Respect in the skies." Signs waved above the crowd. Reporters pushed microphones forward. One shouted, "Mrs. Johnson, are you calling for Atlas Airlines to fire the crew?" Another yelled. "Will you sue?" Naomi lifted a hand, her voice calm but commanding enough to silence the room. "Tonight is not about punishment. Tonight is about dignity. My daughter deserved respect. Every passenger deserves respect. That will be my fight, starting now." The crowd roared. Cameras zoomed closer. Amara clung to her mother's hand, her eyes wide. She whispered, barely audible, "Mom, I don't like this." Naomi leaned down, brushing a kiss against her temple. "I know, sweetheart, but you're not alone in it. Look around, all these people are standing because of you." And when Amara looked, really looked, she saw faces black, white, brown, young, old, all lifted in solidarity. Some were crying, others chanting. For the first time that day, the heaviness in her chest loosened. Richard Coleman stepped off the plane behind them, his old briefcase in hand. A reporter shoved a microphone toward him, but he shook his head. Instead, he looked to Amar and said quietly, "Remember, this silence may feel safe, but it never saves anyone. You taught me that tonight." The crowd surged forward again, chanting, recording, demanding more. Naomi guided her daughter through it all, each flash of light striking her like an old battlefield she knew too well. But in her heart she carried calm, because she knew the next chapter of this story would not be written in chaos. It would be written in policy, in boardrooms, in commitments that reshaped the skies. And as they moved toward the waiting black car outside, Amara whispered the words that would echo through her life, "Mom, I just wanted to sit in my seat, but maybe this is bigger than that." Naomi squeezed her hand. "Yes, Amara, it's much bigger. And because of you, everything is about to change." The press conference was held 4 weeks later inside the gleaming headquarters of Atlas Airlines in Atlanta. Navy and silver banners hung from the high atrium walls, and on each one the words shone boldly, "The Amara Protocol." The air buzzed with anticipation. as if the entire building itself were aware that history was about to be written. Dr. Naomi Johnson stood at the podium, dressed in a sharp black suit that reflected the gravity of the moment. Her posture was tall, her gaze steady. She looked every bit the CEO who had built a billion-dollar company from scratch. But she also carried the quiet fire of a mother who had fought for her child's dignity at 30,000 feet. At her side sat Amara Johnson, in a simple white dress. Her monogram backpack rested at her feet, and her leather-bound journal lay open on her lap. Though just 14, her presence radiated a maturity that made seasoned journalists lean forward in their seats. Naomi began. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but every word struck like a hammer against the walls of prejudice. 4 weeks ago, my daughter Amara was told she did not belong in a seat that was rightfully hers. She was humiliated not because of policy, but because of prejudice. Tonight, we say never again, not for her, not for anyone. The audience erupted in applause, thunderous, heartfelt, unrestrained. Naomi raised a hand for quiet. The Amara Protocol, she continued, is not an idea. It is a mandate. From this day forward, every Atlas Airlines employee, from pilots to ground staff, will undergo mandatory anti-bias training. An independent review board will have full authority to investigate discrimination complaints, and our AI systems, yes, the very systems my company developed, will be updated to flag and prevent irregularities in ticketing, ensuring facts, not bias, guide decisions. Behind her, massive screens lit up with bullet points. Cameras clicked, pens flew across notepads, and live-stream comment sections exploded. Naomi paused, then turned to her daughter. But this is not just about corporations or contracts. This is about voices that are too often silenced. And I would like the most important voice in this room to be heard. Gas rippled through the hall as Amara rose. She looked fragile at first, her small hands trembling as she adjusted the microphone. The room quieted, every eye on her. She took a breath, then spoke. Respect doesn't need a title. It belongs to everyone. Her voice, soft at first, grew stronger with each word. That day on the plane, I just wanted to sit in my seat. I wanted to feel safe. But I learned something. Silence doesn't protect you. Speaking up does. Even if your voice shakes, the audience stood to their feet. Applause thundered, some clapping through tears. Reporters captured the moment, headlines forming in real time. Child speaks truth to power. Respect in the skies. Among the crowd. Elena Morales streamed the speech live. Her caption read, "From humiliation to history. Amara teaches the world dignity." Thousands shared it instantly. Richard Coleman, sitting quietly in the front row, wiped his eyes. Later, he would admit to journalists, "That child taught me more in one flight than I learned in 70 years. When the applause subsided, Naomi spoke again. This protocol is not optional. It is the future of an industry that serves millions. And I promise you, if Atlas Airlines can adopt this standard, so can every airline across America. Within days, rival airlines announced they would implement similar policies. United, American, and JetBlue released statements citing the moral urgency of the Amara Protocol.